Hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to show you how anyone can paint this easy, realistic watercolor mushroom in Procreate. I will show you how you can easily paint this watercolor style mushroom with simple techniques. Whether you're a beginner or an advanced artist, these tips will help take your work to the next level. You can find the exact brushes and canvases in the description below. The color palettes and sketch will be available for free. For this painting, I am using the rough textured canvas. And to start off, I'm going to start painting the top, which is known as the cap of the mushroom. So to start off, I'm going to pick a red tone color. And as you can see, I have already imported the sketch underneath the watercolor texture canvas. And I'm going to paint underneath the layer. It says paint here. And I'm going to start with the wet on dry brush. And I'm going to reduce the opacity to around 60% and keep the size to 100%. I like to stay on the edge of the sketches to have more crisp and sharp lines, and then I will move forward and fill the areas in the middle, just like this. You don't really need the sketch, but for those who need it, it is available for you. We are also going to paint the two mushrooms on the bottom here as well. And if you are having difficulties with smaller areas, you can always reduce the size to have more accuracy. And it's perfectly fine if you go over the lines. We can go over again at the end to erase some of the parts. But again, watercolor, it doesn't have to be perfect. And going over the lines is perfectly normal for watercolor. So the first part of the mushroom is completed. Now I'm going to add a mid-tone and then the dark tones as well. So create a new layer. And we're going to go a little bit darker now. Wet on dry brush again and increase the opacity to around 70%. And we're going to fill on the just left corner because the light's coming from the right side. So it's going to be a bit more darker on the left side here. And don't forget the two mushrooms at the bottom here as well. And adding the mid-tone colors don't really have to be very accurate because we will be blending them later on. Now once the mid-tone is completed, we're going to add the dark tones now. So create a new layer and go a little bit more darker now and increase the opacity to around 80% to be a bit more thicker at this time. Now we're going to focus on the left corners to keep it a bit more darker. Adding variation of colors gives that value and 3D effect, especially the mushroom. And now we're going to work on the stipe of the mushroom. So create a new layer, and we're going to pick a dark brown tone color and keep it a little bit light in the beginning, and then we're going to progress to mid and dark tones. Pick the wet on dry brush, opacity around 60%. And we're just going to fill out the bottom here, just like this. You can use multiple strokes, but for me, I like to keep it fast and simple, so I like to keep it with one simple stroke at a time. If you do add multiple strokes because you need to be a bit more accurate, you can, but you just have to blend them later on. Now we're going to add a mid-tone color, so create a new layer and we're going to go a little bit darker and increase the opacity to around 75 to 80% here. And we're just going to fill out the left top corners just like this, where the shadows of the mushrooms will show. At the same time, light is coming from the right side. If you are enjoying these tutorials, hit that like button, subscribe to my channel where you'll get notified of new tutorials coming out. I am super excited with the fall season coming up. It is one of my favorite times of the year. There are so many things to paint and sketch. So please comment down below if you guys want to see something specific in the autumn, fall season. So back to this painting, we're going to now move on to adding the dark tones. And just to finish it off, we're going to add the dark tones of the stipe. And now at the bottom part of the mushroom, I want to keep it as a moss with some luscious greens and some leaves at the bottom. So we're going to create a new layer and pick a green tone color using the wet on dry brush again and reducing the opacity to around 65%, filling the moss bottom part here. You can make it as a rock, but I like the color contrast of the greens and the red. And I'm going to add a mid-tone color as well. So create a new layer and go a little bit more darker and fill in the spots on the left corner as well. And now using the same tone color, I'm just going to increase the opacity and reduce the size so we can be more accurate with the leaves. It kind of reminds me of ferns, but I'm going to keep it very simple, just like this. Now I'm going to add the darkest tone by creating a new layer now. And just on the bottom corners, just like this, where the light will be reduced, a lot more shadier here. And I'm going to add some textures of the dark on the leaves as well, to give a little bit more value. And now we're going to start blending. So open up your Layers tab, and we're going to combine these. To avoid over smudging, I'm going to combine and keep the layers in a category where I put the cap, the stipe, and the bottom part of the mushroom. So we're going to use the moving blender and keep the size to around 55% because it's a bigger area. And then we're just going to go back and forth, wiggling it around, going in one direction rather than going back and forth, just like this. Some people ask me how to avoid over smudging. And the key is to only mix colors, two-tone colors at a time if you can. Going in one direction in a smooth motion back and forth. And now we're going to move on with the stipe of the mushroom here and slowly building up and mixing them together. Just like this. And now the bottom part of the mushroom here. Now I'm going to add some white spots on the top of the cap of the mushroom. So we're going to create a new layer and use a white tone color and use the fine line brush now. And I'm going to keep this size to around 80%. Fairly large because the areas are big here, and then just fill the areas like this. They are the most iconic and recognizable mushrooms, often depicted in fairy tales with that bright red cap with the white spots on it. I really love the colors because the visuals are very striking because of the color contrast. Now I'm going to go back to the color that we used for this type, which is a dark brown, and use it to create a bit more texture. So go back and we're going to use the fine line brush, and we're going to create some simple lines by reducing the opacity. And just like this, giving a little bit more texture giving that nice, realistic aging process of the mushroom. And here's a fun technique I like to use to give that realistic color pigment mixture is using a dark tone color like this. And we're going to create a new layer and increase the opacity to around 75%. And I'm going to focus areas where there will be a lot of darker shading areas. And from there, I'm going to use the regular blender and keep the size to around 30%. And we're going to drag out the dark pigments to the light cones like this. Gives that natural watercolor mixture of the dark pigments to the light. Now, since we're already using the fine line brush, I want to add some lines at the bottom of the mushroom. So we're going to pick the dark tone red tone color that we had before and reduce the opacity to around 40%. And we're going to create a new layer here. And we're just going to layer the top with this line here, just like this. Kind of like a lip of the cap, just at the bottom here. And I'm going to increase the opacity just a bit. And I want to make the white spots pop out a little bit more. And I'm going to do this by adding some shadows to the left side of the white spots. This will give that perception of depth of the mushroom protruding out, just like this. Just small amounts, you don't have to be too crazy about this process. Just a little slight touch of it can make a huge difference. Now I want to add some watercolor stain looks. So we're going to create a new layer on top of the last area of the category of the bottom moss. And using the wet on dry brush, we're going to pick a dark red tone color and reduce the opacity to around 35%. And as you can see, it will be a bit more transparent but harder edges to give that watercolor dry stain look, just like this. And we're going to use this with every single mushroom cap. And we can even go even darker to add a little bit extra layer here as well. And I'm going to use the same technique with the stipe area as well. So we're going to go back using the dark brown stipe pigment color that we had before and use the watercolor stain technique again, focusing on the areas where it's a bit more darker and pigment wise. And then we're going to do the same process with the moss area here as well, giving a little bit more texture with the watercolor stain look. And since the light is coming from the right, I want to add some light reflection. So go to your gouache layer and pick a white tone color and use the gouache brush. And reduce the opacity to around 35% and the size to around 45%. And as you can see, I made a little sketch for you guys to follow along, but anywhere is fine, where you just fill out the top right corner area here. And don't forget the mushrooms on the bottom as well. and a little bit of the moss reflection here too. And now once it's all completed, I'm going to remove the sketch by unchecking the sketch area. And now we're going to clean up a little bit of the mushroom here. And by combining all the layers, we're going to make it a single layer now. And go to your eraser tool. And I like to use a fine line brush to erase any areas that you don't want to have. You can reduce the size to be a bit more accurate and precise, and go along and clean up some of the areas that you want cleaned up. And there you have it, simple, watercolor style, realistic, red mushroom. If you enjoyed this tutorial, I have a lot more tutorials for you guys on my page. You can continue painting with me by clicking on the next video. See you there!